It's off. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. We're honored to have the president of our local community college, Dr. Luke Robbins, join us. And so we're going to be talking about how the college is doing and what direction the college is going to be heading in the next few years. And we'll open it up to questions to you all so that you can ask him whatever's on your mind. So thanks so much, Luke, for joining us.
Sure. So Colleen and I were talking about some, some basic topics to cover this morning. So I'll jump into at least the first couple, and hopefully we'll have some time, as Colleen said at the end. If you got questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them as best I can. So the first general topic was, how are we doing since the pandemic hit us, and what's changed about the way we are delivering instruction and taking care of our students in this new world we find ourselves in. And I guess I would preface it by saying, I guess I missed the class on the day they talked about how to lead in a pandemic. I must have, I cut class that day or something, because I don't have any notes on that. And I think a lot of us feel that way, that nothing in our background really could have prepared us for where we are today and for what we confronted, in the middle of March. When the pandemic really took off and the governor began to issue his guidelines, and we did that first shelter in place, we were just finishing up the winter quarter. So that was, back, everybody getting the Wayback Machine, that was the middle of March. Seems like years ago, but that's when it was. And we were just finishing up the winter quarter, which was fortunate for us in one sense, because we were at a place where we could wind the students down at the end of that quarter, and we had a week of spring break planned at that time. We extended that by a second week, so we pushed the start date for the spring quarter back a week, which gave everybody 2 weeks to do some planning and thinking around how we would pivot to remote instruction. And so we spent that 2 weeks. One of the things I would say that really kind of was a blessing in disguise for us was a lot of our faculty had been working in the online environment and delivering courses online for years. We have we had a very robust online program before the pandemic hit. So we had a lot of core knowledge, if you will, among our faculty about how you do online instruction. And it's very different than doing it face-to-face, as you might imagine. But so we had that core competency there, and those faculty really helped some of the other faculty that weren't maybe quite as used to being in an online environment get ready for that spring quarter. And so we pivoted at the beginning of the spring quarter entirely into an online remote environment. We had anybody that was working in back offices that could work remotely, we sent them home, and they were working remotely at the beginning of the spring quarter. We have now, as it's kind of progressed, there's a core group of back office people, particularly in our business office and in our student services area, that do come into campus and work in their offices at least part of the week, because there's just some stuff we can't do remotely. Payroll and other sorts of things. And an interesting footnote, in the middle of all of this in May, we migrated from our old, all of our old software into a new enterprise software environment that's PeopleSoft. And literally we turned the switch off on all the stuff in the middle of May in the old systems and moved over to the new system. And we did that all remotely, which was quite an interesting experience. So, you know, we did that successfully. Later in the spring quarter, we got some guidance from the governor's office about identifying programs that were associated with essential workers, that we could, if we could develop a safety plan, we could at least partially reopen for face-to-face instruction in those areas. And so for us, those areas are the allied health, you know, specifically our medical assisting and our nursing program, our construction trades program, automotive, and welding. And so the requirement was that for each of those areas, they would develop a safety plan and a set of safety protocols that would get signed off on, and then we could come back. At least, obviously the idea was, you know, if you're going to learn to weld, you have to be in a welding shop at a certain point, and you got to go in a booth and actually weld. And for our nursing students, they actually have to do clinical rotations, or they have to do clinical simulations in our simulation lab. So we were able to do that, and about midway through the spring quarter, then we started to have some students back on campus with faculty. If you think about it, you know, those groups were, if you, you know, comparing it to K-12, they're cohorts. They're isolated cohorts. They don't interact with other students. They're just in a group themselves. And so you can isolate them in a bubble, so to speak, and keep them from interacting with other students on campus. So we did that in the spring. We continued through into the summer quarter. And that's basically what we're doing in the fall quarter as well. So we're in a situation where we have some students on campus that are doing some labs and shop work. We're still doing the bulk of our instruction remotely and primarily in an online environment. We do some synchronous, but mostly asynchronous learning, meaning it is you log in, you work when you can work. Some of the courses have some specific times during the week at a set time where students will log in and do what we're doing today, like a Zoom meeting in class. That's the way we're doing our business. That's how we do our committee meetings, all the other stuff we're doing. So we're becoming very adept at Zoom as everybody else is. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of what we're doing from the standpoint of delivering instruction.
Great. Thanks, Luke. So I have some kind of general questions. How many students right now are attending PC, and has that dropped substantially since the pandemic hit?
So we're down about 20% from this time last fall. And we were down in the spring. We were roughly steady in the summertime, down some, but not as much as we anticipated. But we're down about 20%, and that's pretty common across the state in two-year colleges. Interestingly enough, Running Start, we have a record number of Running Start students this fall. And, that may be in part affected by, what's happening in the K-12, realm. So we got a lot of Running Start students. We had seen really a collapse in our international student enrollment even before the pandemic, and the pandemic just exacerbated that. The other thing that is significant for us in the fall quarter is we didn't bring our soccer teams back in the fall because the NWAC, the conference that we play in, suspended play for the fall, and normally we would play soccer in the fall. And that may sound like a small thing, but we carry, about between 25 and 30 student athletes on both the men's and women's roster. and they are full-time students. So that's in the neighborhood of 60 full-time equivalent students that we don't have, that we would normally have in the fall. And that accounts for a good chunk of that 20% decline. But it's like that across the system. And part of that may be attributable to, you know, pivoting to a remote delivery and some folks not being comfortable with that. But the other thing I think is really important for us all to remember is, you know, the kind of students that tend to go to community college. In terms of, you know, where they're at from a socioeconomic standpoint, a big portion of our students tend to be first-generation college goers in their family. Many of them, you know, the average age of our students is 28. And so a bunch of them they're parenting, they're taking care of elders in their family. And many of them are in situations right now that are incredibly uncertain. And just, you know, I think for some of them, the idea of trying to juggle their kids being home and in school and them being home going to school is just a bridge too far right now in terms of the levels of stress that they're dealing with. You know, they're worried about their jobs. They're worried about their housing situation. Even before the pandemic, you know, we did a survey of our students, and that showed that this is pre-pandemic. Up to a third of our students identified themselves as food insecure, and nearly a third of them identified themselves as housing insecure. And that hasn't done anything but gotten worse, obviously, through the pandemic, even with, you know, even with eviction moratoriums and all that sort of stuff. That stuff is still hanging over their heads. And so there's a whole lot of uncertainty in the environment that they're living in. And you know, you got to hand it to the students who are sticking it out, I think, because they're dealing with all the stresses that each one of us is dealing with every day. And on top of that, they're trying to go to school.
So how many students now are attending PC, and what was the, you know, the higher number?
Let me look real quick and see if I've got the exact number. Hang on just a minute.
Hey, Luke, I just shared it in the Zoom chat.
Thank you, Carrie.
Yep.
Carrie Desser, our PIO, is on. Public Information Officer is on. Thanks, Carrie.
Great.
So that's in the chat.
Yeah.
So state-supported FTE is about 1,300 right now.
Okay.
Another thing to keep in mind with us in terms of when you think about enrollment is, so that is state-supported FTE, which means, you know, we get an allocation from the state. There's also a group of students, and this student number is down quite a bit too. We offer programs at Clallam Bay and Olympic correction facilities. And as you can imagine, Clallam Bay is a tough spot right now to be trying to do congregate instruction, you know, because they're dealing with their own potential, you know, they're trying to they're trying to make sure they don't have an outbreak there. And so that's really affected our ability to provide instruction for incarcerated folks. And that's, again, happening across the state at the colleges that serve incarcerated populations. So.
So I see a question there from Jim. Does the 1328 include Running Start students?
I don't know the answer to that right off the top of my head. I believe it does. although they're a different kind of, we consider them a contract student because there's Jim, as you know, there's a separate contract for Running Start students. And so we get funded a little bit differently, for them than we do for others. And Carrie, I see, has put something else in the chat. There's a link there you can go take a look at if you want to take a look at the enrollment numbers.
Okay.
In summary, though, this is pretty much where we are across the state, in the neighborhood of anywhere from 15 to 25% down in enrollment. And, we're obviously hopeful that it'll rebound as we're able to, begin to transition back to more face-to-face instruction and people feel a little bit more confident about what's going to happen moving forward.
I was just looking at your areas of study. Which one of those comprises the largest number of students and the most classes, and which are the fastest growing?
So the ones that are hot, both in terms of, job prospects and living wage jobs and so on. I mean, it would go without saying that our allied health programs are pretty important right now. Nursing, we expanded our nursing program in the capacity for our enrollment a year and a half ago. And when you combine both the students that are in the nursing program that have actually been admitted to the nursing program, so they're either first year or second year nursing students, and then all the students who are taking general education courses to prepare to enter that program and who've identified that that's their, like, nursing or allied health is what they want to go into, that's probably a huge, that's a huge chunk of our total population. And our nursing programs, like nursing programs across the state, and I know Jennifer's on here, Jennifer Burkhart, we have a waiting list every year in terms of students wanting to get into that program, and the demand is huge in the state, and it will continue to be huge in the state. There's a need for medical assistance right now, as everyone would assume, because those are the folks that provide a lot of face-to-face primary first touch care to people when they come into clinics and in the hospital and other places. So those are big. Welding continues to be a really strong program for us. There's an ongoing demand for welders, and they make great money. And so one of our challenges sometimes is to try to keep a student enrolled to completing a certificate or a degree in welding, because they get hired at a decent wage and they decide, okay, I'm gonna go work instead of finishing the degree. Cybersecurity is a growing field for us. We have an associate's degree that's focused on cybersecurity. Our Bachelor of Applied Science in Management is a strong program for us, and we're looking to expand that with some specializations. We're looking specifically at cybersecurity as a expanding that into potentially an associate's degree program. Although we have a good relationship with Western Washington, they have a bachelor's degree in cybersecurity. But we're also looking at the entrepreneurial side of digital media and gaming and things like that as a potential bachelor's degree. That's a really, continues to be an expanding field, and lots of our students are tech savvy and very interested in that. Transfer, AA transfer or AS transfers that, are preparing students to transfer to a four-year university continue to be really strong programs. The vast majority of the Running Start students that we have, that's what they're, that's why they're in Running Start. They're working towards a transfer to a four-year university. And an exciting thing that we're going to really kick off in the winter quarter. Normally, a student would take about 2 years to complete an associate's degree with us, a transfer associate's degree. We're introducing, starting in the winter, an accelerated AA program that would allow students, if they stuck with the program all the way through, it would allow them to complete an associate's degree in 1 year. And so it's kind of blowing up the quarter model and saying you're going to take 2 classes every 5.5 weeks. And then you turn right around and sign up for 2 more and 2 more and 2 more and 2 more, and you just push through it. And so we're excited about that. We think that meets a market for some students who are able to fast track and have the ability to do that. And students can also sort of jump into that, and then if their circumstances change, jump back into the normal transfer program. So we're excited about that. We're really trying to think outside the box in terms of the way we deliver instruction. And I think the other silver lining for the pandemic, excuse me, for higher ed, is it's forced us to think differently about how we do what we do. And I really think, I see Steve Bierman shaking his head. I think he would agree with me. I don't think we'll return. I don't think higher education will be the same after the pandemic. I think online will take a much larger role. Remote instruction and asynchronous instruction will be much more prevalent. And I think we're going to be forced, to look at different ways, creative ways to deliver our product, which is, instruction. And then the challenges come, how do we support students in that new environment so that we are creating the environment where they can really be successful. And, we've always prided ourselves at Peninsula, because we're a small college, we get to know our students. When they're on campus, we get to know them. Steve knows his students by name. I know students by name. They know me. When I walk across campus, they know who I am after they've been there for a little while. And we pride ourselves on that, and that's been a real essential part of the way we do business. And that's the part that I think we're missing the most in terms of just our college community, is not seeing each other and not seeing our students face to face. And that's been a challenge for us. It's been stressful for people.
So, Luke, kind of some general questions, and then I want to dive into a little bit more about the nursing program, the allied health program. But how many total FTEs do you have, or generally, how many employees do you have, and what's your average annual budget and the impact? Can you describe the economic impact that the college has to our county?
So our operating budget last year was right around $18 million. Mm-hmm. And probably I'm picturing the pie chart in my head right now. The biggest chunk of our expenditure in that budget is salaries and benefits, and it's probably right around 80% of that $18 million is tied up in salary and benefits. And one way of thinking about it, obviously from the economic development standpoint, is that money circulates in the local economy. Mm-hmm. And so if just for the sake of argument, if you say roughly $15 million going into the local economy, and if you use those economic calculators, how many times does it turn over in the local economy? A real conservative estimate would be, so maybe it turns over 3 times in the local economy. That gives you, you're talking about a $45 million impact to the local economy. And one of the things we've been fortunate to be able to do, because we had because we had some CARES money early on, and we had some other, there was some other support for the response to the pandemic, is we've been able to maintain our employment, our employee roles without laying a bunch of people off. Where we've shrunk some is in our part-time instructional faculty that are at-will employees that if we have courses for them, we can give them a class. So we've sort of retrenched, and more of our full-time students, full-time faculty are teaching those classes because we're teaching fewer sections. But our full-time employees, we've been able to keep them employed, which is a real positive thing, I think, for the local economy. And we're hopeful, obviously everybody's looking ahead to the legislative session that's coming up in January. And we're also looking forward to see, what's going to happen at the federal level in terms of, is there going to be any additional stimulus? And then more specifically, how would that stimulus money, if it comes, be distributed? But there's a real concern there, because the only the two major ways we generate revenue are through the allocation that comes to us from the state and from tuition dollars. And obviously our tuition dollars, because our enrollment is down, our tuition dollars are down. Mm-hmm. You balance that with obviously we put some, for all intents and purposes, we put some buildings to sleep because we don't have people, we're trying to centralize where people are. And then we can cut back on utilities and, set our thermostats back and so on and so forth. So we're saving some money with that. Obviously, we're not traveling right now. So there's, our travel budgets, we can sweep travel budgets and things like that. So we're not expending as much as we would have in a normal year, but we're also not generating the same amount of revenue that we would normally generate.
So the number of FTEs that you have at the college is about what?
I want to say about 200.
Okay. And so the allied health program, if there's such a big demand on both the business side of it and the student side of it, what is the limiting factor that's preventing you from expanding that program?
The single biggest limiting factor is the student to teacher ratio that has to be maintained in both nursing and medical assisting. So for most of the courses, and particularly for clinical rotations and stuff like that, it's a 10 students to 1 faculty ratio. And as you might imagine, nursing faculty are, number one, they're hard to come by because it's a very competitive market. And number two, then because of that ratio, it's an expensive program to run. And so that's one limiting factor. The other limiting factor for programs like that is the availability of clinical rotations, clinical sites to do clinical rotations to generate the required number of clinical hours that are required. And for those of us in rural areas like we are, we rely on our partners like OMC. They're great partners to work with, and we couldn't do the program. We couldn't have the program we've got if we didn't have the support of OMC and Jamestown Clinic and other healthcare providers. And they actually, were instrumental in helping us expand the program a couple of years ago to add some faculty and add some capacity. But that's the biggest limiting factor. And we're not alone in that. Capacity is an issue across the state and actually across the country in terms of just pushing, being able to create a pipeline that's big enough to meet the demand.
Makes sense. So we've got a lot of brilliant people on this Zoom meeting today, and I'd love for you guys to ask some of your compelling questions. So if you want to just take yourself, go ahead, Mark. Brilliant person number one.
Hi, Mark.
Well, I don't know if I'd fit into that category, but Luke, I just had a question here about the remote learning, because I've got two grandkids that are in the elementary schools down in California. When they first started this stay-at-home thing and trying to learn this stuff, they're both very, very bright and they're way at the top of their classes, but their grades just kind of plummeted for quite a while there. I think they're getting used to it now, but I was kind of curious about, you know, the students in some of your classes here. There's no teacher that they're working right with in the class. Has that been an impact on that learning, you know, ability or whatever?
You know, I think it's undeniable that some students struggle in an online environment, and particularly when it's an asynchronous online environment. You know, so you log in whenever you want to log in, and there's the material, and you know, you do that sort of thing. I think everybody's missing, you know, the human touch, so to speak, of actually being face to face with people in a classroom, and we're all missing it just, you know, in our personal lives, right? So there's an element of that. I think where this has really been a struggle is in those elementary age groups. When the you know, socialization is such an important part of what happens in grade school. You know, learning to get along with other people, and you know, all that sort of stuff that we, you know, that we learned without even knowing we were learning it when we were in grade school. Most of our students are pretty savvy, you know, in terms of the electronic environment. And as I said, you know, a lot of our students had already experienced online instruction, at least as part of the instructional model that we were already doing. So most of them made that transition fairly smoothly. Some people struggle with that environment. This might, you know, set your thinking on its head just a little bit, but you know, if I can play devil's advocate, some students learn better in an online environment. They actually thrive in that environment more than they do in a face-to-face environment. We've always made the assumption that you know, as the joke goes, you know, the sage on the stage is the way to do instruction. You know, you have the smart person in the front of the room and everybody else is furiously taking notes. That doesn't work for all students. In fact, it doesn't work for a lot of students. And different modalities of providing instruction, I actually think that what I call a distributed environment is probably the ideal environment. And by distributed, I mean it has a component of face-to-face, but it also has a component of online or self-paced learning. It has a component of small group interaction and learning, and that when you combine those, you're really addressing the learning needs of lots of different students. And all of us know, probably, if we think about it, that we have a particular modality where we learn the best, right? For some of us, we're tactile learners, right? We can read about it until, you know, the cows come home, but until we actually do it and have that tactile experience, we don't get it, right? Other people can they read it once, bang, I'm good, I understand it. And so there's lots of different, you know, there's lots of different variation in between. So that's why I think moving forward, education is going to be different. I think we're going to learn a lot about what works for students and what doesn't work for students so well. And we're going to end up with a more, frankly, I think, robust learning environment at the end of all this.
No. So does anyone else have some questions for Luke?
Colleen, this is Jim. Can I just add on to what Luke?
Absolutely.
Since we were talking elementary and the pre-K-12 areas. So 2 weeks ago, the school board directors were in the annual conference of WASDA, and one of the presenters, his name is Mike Rayburn. That's Rayburn, and I would highly recommend folks go and check out his YouTube videos. But a couple of things that really resonated with me is that he said there's always opportunities for making amazing changes. And then the other one was believe that the world is conspiring to help you. And so for me, I'm going to keep those handy because we do have the opportunity right now to make amazing changes to the public education system. And I look over to my right and there's this chart that is from another author by the name of Jamie Vollmer, and talks schools cannot do it alone. And it goes back to the 1900s, and there was 4 items that were on the plate of public schools in the world of health related. And now in the 2000s, we have 30 items that are on the public school plate for ensuring health and security in the buildings. And so often the schools are the ones responsible for holding the community together. And what we have found with this COVID, that it is a whole community responsibility. But yes, our students learn just as we as adults learn differently. And some are being successful with the virtual and then our hybrid model. And some not so much, and that social engagement. I don't want to call it a positive thing, but every school district in the state, so 295, and then every school district in the nation is going through the same thing right now. And every college is going through the same thing. And it's going back to normal. Everything I think about is my parents were product of the Depression and World War II. I don't think if I was to ask my mom right now, who was a teacher, would she want to go back to those times? Probably not so much. And we as a community need to grasp this and then walk together to get us on the other side. And that means those social distancing requirements. I mean, and don't want to get on big soapbox here because I'm taking Luke's time, but we have to work together on this because we know that some of those recent spikes we have are related to people that believe that social distancing and not wearing masks doesn't apply to them, that thing. So that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Rod Fleck had his hand up, wanted to ask a question. Go ahead, Rod.
Good morning, Doc. Good morning, Colleen. Hey, Doc. So I really appreciate the overview of what you have, what you've been doing, and it's remarkable. Question I've got for you is, let's say it's late August 2022, and in your mind, what do you see Peninsula College being like in that post-COVID environment, in light of some of the changes and things to just address the pandemic and then moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rod. And, you know, one of the things that's been frustrating for all of us, I think, who are trying to, you know, get out the magic 8 ball or the crystal ball or whatever and predict the future, is it's very difficult to be planful in this environment because it's a very volatile environment right now in terms of what's happening with the pandemic, and then how that has a ripple effect through you know, it has an economic impact, it has an educational impact, it has a societal impact, it has a behavioral health impact that we're still, you know, dealing with. But if I had to look down the road post pandemic, there was a question in the chat box that relates to this too. I think, you know, Jim was asking if this creates additional opportunities to do broader geographical outreach beyond our service area. And the answer is absolutely yes, it does. And it causes us to focus about that because, you know, literally we have a couple of international students right now that are home in their home country that are taking courses with us today. And so one of the things that you know, being in a remote or, you know, being challenged in a remote environment causes you to think about is it's not, you know, our service area technically doesn't end at the Hood Canal Bridge. It can expand beyond that. And so that's something that we're very actively thinking about. And so, you know, what does August, you know, 2022 look like? You know, from our strategic standpoint, in August, we would be we'd be winding down a series of summer programs for kids, for school age kids in STEM, other sorts of things, you know, hopefully week-long on-campus sorts of experiences. We'd be winding down other sorts of summer programming targeted at specific audiences, whether that would be, you know, elder hostel sorts of things that, you know, tap into the great natural resources that we have around us, or other kinds of opportunities like that. And we'd be, you know, hopefully recovering enrollment, although I think where that enrollment would fall would be very different than what it is today. And so I think there's always going to be, you know, there will always be the core of students who want to come to campus and have that experience, but we would also, I think, see an expanded number of students who are remote learners. And so, you know, part of our challenge, Rod, is to figure out what kind of programming works in that environment, and how do we distinguish ourselves from the crowd of folks that are potentially in that space. And one of the ways we do it is by articulating and building programs around the unique place we live. So place-based or place-focused educational opportunities, I think, are really important for us moving forward. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Here's a question from George. How successful have cybersecurity students been in finding employment, and do you provide support for job placement?
We do provide some support for students as they're beginning to, you know, look for work. The cybersecurity program is still pretty new in terms of, you know, the number of years we've been doing it, and I don't have the job placement data at my fingertips on that, but we could certainly get it back to you, Colleen, and you could get it out to folks. It's a growing field, and, you know, Steve Bierman, I see, is on here, and Steve, you know, teaches in our computer science programs. One of the advantages to programs like that is, you know, you can work remotely, and so part of it is, you know, do you have access to robust broadband? And, you know, Jim was on his soapbox earlier. One of my soapboxes is, you know, robust broadband for all. It's absolutely critical to us, I think, moving forward, not just from an educational standpoint, but from an economic development standpoint. That's what's going to allow us to attract new business and industry to our area. Because if I believe really firmly that we're going to get to a point very soon, and I think we're already seeing it, where if folks can work from home or work at a remote location, and the quality of life there is significantly enhanced because of, you know, where they are in space, people are, you know, companies are going to migrate to those places. And I think there's going to be I believe there's going to be significant out-migration from the I-5 corridor over time. Mm-hmm. And I think we're positioned, if we have robust broadband, we will be positioned to be able to compete for those companies relocating out here. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really exciting.
So Jim McIntyre, do you want to ask your question?
There we go. I think Luke pretty well covered it. You know, just thinking about the opportunities with online learning or some sort of hybrid learning model. You know, that either sets up the opportunity to poach in other people's garden, or maybe to reach an arrangement where we specialize in a certain range of things here on the peninsula, and other people do similar but different things in various other geographic things, if if students are electronically mobile. And it, you know, kind of piggybacks on what Luke was just saying with regard to out-migration from the I-5 corridor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, you know, it's going to be, I mean, the challenge that we're going to deal with moving forward, I think, is that's going to be a very competitive space. And so I do think it's important for us to be able to differentiate programs that we have from others on any number of different, you know, it could be value. You know, you can make a value argument that we have the most cost-effective program. You can make the argument that, you know, there are some unique aspects to our programming, either because of the way we're delivering the programming, you know, the way we're packaging it, or fast tracking it. You know, so for instance, if we had a cybersecurity program, a bachelor's degree cybersecurity program that could be completed in 3 years, and everybody else's degree program takes 4 years, some folks are going to gravitate to us because they get done quicker and they're into the job market more quickly. That's part of our idea behind that accelerated AA program. Sorry, my phone is going off.
You know, something I've found interesting, we have 34 community and technical colleges in the state. And obviously the district that Peninsula College serves doesn't have any overlap with Olympic College that's down in Kitsap County. But in areas along the I-5 corridor, a lot of those districts overlap. And so they compete with one another, which makes it much more challenging there. And I've heard conversations with some of the, you know, Renton Technical Community College, you know, the president there was saying, we have too many community colleges in this state. And so we're all, you know, competing with one another in the I-5 corridor for those students. And it's not necessarily in the state's best interest, but, you know, some entity proposed to create a college, and you know, that's kind of what we're left with. So I think that's something that is, you know, we don't have to you never realize the problems you don't have to deal with, but that's certainly nothing right. That is a problem up here.
Right. And there's a real, you know, within our community college system, if you think about it, and, you know, you could look at a map and see where those colleges are located. Mm-hmm. It follows, you know, other sorts of economic development patterns and other sorts of things. Like, so there's this, you know, our population centers are along the I-5 corridor, with the exception of Spokane. And so, you know, there's that cluster of colleges up and down the I-5 corridor. Then there's this other group of colleges like us, the smaller rural serving community colleges that have, our service areas are very different than those I-5, you know, urban suburban environments, and the needs of the community are unique as well. And so, and it varies from region to region. And so we have to be, we're always going to try to be responsive first and foremost to the communities that are in our service area and that we serve. That's why we have a facility, and we work so hard to get the facility finished in Port Townsend at Fort Worden. Mm-hmm. And that was a long, frankly, harrowing process to get 202 rehabilitated and get it open. There's, you know, we're committed to the West End. as a college. And that's why we have that facility in Forks. And that's why we acquired it and renovated it. And it's a, I think Rod would agree, it's a central piece of the community in Forks. And we want it to be that way. Because serving people in that area is very important to us. There are challenges involved, obviously, in doing that, but we're committed to it. And so one of the things we're looking at too, looking down the road, Rod's, question, what does 2022 look like? We're in active communication with some other rural colleges about how we share resources, how we leverage resources, how we can work together to provide programming that perhaps we would share among several colleges. So there are a number, for instance, of allied health programs, radiography technology, physical therapy assistant, occupational therapy assistant, phlebotomy, et cetera, that are very specialized in. There's some pent-up need for those people, but that need would get filled by, graduating a class or two classes in a rural area. And then after that, you're glutting the market with people who can't get jobs. And so one of the things we're in conversation with some of the other small colleges is, what if we shared that program? So we had a program for, 3 years, which would be long enough to graduate 2 classes. And then that program moves to Grace Harbor and sets up shop in Grace Harbor and is there for 3 years, and then moves to Centralia and is in Centralia for 3 years. And if we had 3 colleges and 3 programs, we would be rotating those programs among the 3 colleges. And we're not glutting the market, but we're providing trained, skilled workers for the healthcare professions that we know we need to try to do. So we're looking, at a lot of things like that to try to be as creative as we can be, because, for small colleges like us, critical mass is the thing. Can you get enough students to make that class cost effective to offer?
Mm-hmm. Right. So Priya had a question. Priya, do you want to ask your question, or I can read it here?
So I can ask it. So I was wondering, there's the model that Bellevue College has of serving individuals with developmental disabilities. And I'm wondering if you had any thought about moving into that arena post-pandemic, of course.
So, all of us, all the colleges have a commitment to serving, all students that come to us. So, students who come to us who are veterans, we have a special program for veterans. We do everything we can to accommodate students with disabilities. And a significant number of our student population does, they are receiving some sort of accommodation for disabilities that are documented disabilities. And so, we do everything we can do to accommodate various learning styles and that sort of thing. That gets frankly has been something everybody has struggled with in the pandemic, in this pandemic environment that we're in, because that remote environment can present some challenges for students with certain sorts of disabilities. And unfortunately, that's just that's the nature of the situation that we find ourselves in. And higher education is working hard to try to, ameliorate those sorts of challenges as best we can. Bellevue, if you, in one sense, if you looked at all of our colleges in the system and you rank them by size, we're at one end of the spectrum and Bellevue's at the other end of the spectrum. It's one of the largest, if not the largest college in our system. And so one of the things that they have the ability, they have critical mass because of their size, and they have resources to do, some of those sorts of specialized programs that we would perhaps find a little bit more challenging. But we do everything. We have navigators, what we call student navigators, that are specifically work with students with disabilities. We have another navigator who works with veterans. We have a navigator who works with Native American students. So we're doing it. I think everything we can do to help those students be as successful as they can be.
Thanks, Luke. So we just have a couple more minutes here, and Mona had a great question that I kind of want to follow up on as well. Go ahead, Mona. Oh, there we go.
Yes, there. Hi, Dr. Luke. My question is, as an employer, how do we connect up with the workforce development and the college to get I have two businesses, and one of the areas that we've had difficulty recruiting in is marine mechanics. Mm-hmm. That's a national problem, like nursing. There's a shortage everywhere. We've owned a marine shop in Clown County now for almost 20 years. We have never, ever hired one person out of the county. So what is the connection with getting us employers who need employees hooked up with the college training and working together to sort of have a pipeline coming of people that we can recruit from?
So, there's a couple of different ways to do that. And thanks for the question. A lot of this comes back to, once again, trying to figure out ways to create critical mass and have enough students to make, a program viable over the long term. A lot of times what we do when we do surveys of, what are your needs in the community, we'll ask that question of folks, and they'll say, well, we need a CNC machine operator, somebody who can do CNC design. And we say, so, to the group, well, how many of those do you need? And the answer is, well, we need 3. And that's that's a tough one to respond to, because how do we create, how do we create a program for 3 students? And so part of it is, can we figure out a way to, to create a critical mass so that it makes sense for us to do that sort of thing. The other thing that we're looking at, though, is, we really want to think outside the box of traditional credit instruction and the way we traditionally package credit instruction. And so there may be some opportunities for us to say, okay, if there's a need there, maybe we create, a badge or a certificate in that area and do some real intense focused training that starts and stops, in a compressed time, that makes it more, that gives us the ability to offer that at a rate that makes sense for us. So that we can, break even. We're not looking to make money on it, but we do have to break even on it.
I think in the past we did some cluster development around the marine industry, and the average wage earner in that industry is 6 figures. So it's not like we're creating family wage jobs, we're creating the elite jobs that if we look at 4 more of those people in the community, those are high paying jobs. And historically, I think what happened is we didn't have the employers to support the training as we did at CPI with the CNC training that was established a few years back. We went to CPI, they needed CNC machine workers, then we could initiate that program. I think now what's happening is, yes, there's jobs in the community that are not getting filled, and these are high level jobs. It's not necessarily they need a certificate or a degree to get those jobs, they need skills. So it's really a combination, I think, of workforce development, the employer, and the college into providing qualified workers.
Yep. Yeah.
And, go ahead, Luke. I was just going to say that, the structure that's supposed to support that is the Olympic Workforce Development Council that is housed in Kitsap County government for us. which is a real challenge. They're 2.5 FTEs, and they're, you know, the population base is obviously in Bremerton and Kitsap County. They're very focused on the Navy. And so no hit on them. They're, you know, they have really limited bandwidth. Before the pandemic hit, the EDC was working on and had scheduled roundtables, and one was a maritime roundtable. And that was postponed because it was in person. And we will pick that back up. But that is definitely something that we want to support. And I feel like if it's going to happen, we need to make it happen ourselves, and certainly loop in the Olympic Workforce Development Council, but we can't expect them to lead it for us.
Yes. As an employer, I think we can't wait. We just have to go find other resources. But our indigenous resources here in Clam County with access to water creates a position for the college that no other community college could have. So I think with connecting with those maritime businesses is essential for creating that program.
Agreed. And there's a couple of things in the chat. If you're looking at chat, we have a career center, and that has, if you go to our website, you can see the career center, and that has links both for students who are looking for jobs, but also for employers. And so we'd encourage you to go hit that.
Yep.
We've also got a survey out right now, an employer survey. Mia Boster, who's our Dean of Workforce Programs, put that, and there's a link to that in the chat, and we'd encourage you, please go fill that out, because that's the way we gather information and start to see, okay, this connects with this, and maybe we can figure out a way to, you know, respond to that particular need. So please go fill those out if you haven't.
And I will put that out in our blast email, and I'll put it on our website too.
Thanks, Colleen. Appreciate
Certainly. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr.
So it is 9:04. And Kevin had a question about the automotive tech program. So what's the status of that program, Luke?
So that program is right now on a pause and a teach out. So we've got some students that are enrolled in the program that we'll be finishing out. We did not admit any new students to that program this fall. And, you know, we're basically in a pause mode. We're going to spend some time with folks in that field, you know, our advisory committee and so on, and talk through what the next steps are. But we haven't made a decision about that moving forward yet. That's kind of a work in progress. Okay,
great. All right. Well, I am going to have to call it a morning. Yep. And Dr. Robbins, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate you spending time with us today. And also, I really appreciate you being on the EDC board.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Critically important. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. And have a great day and a great week.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Be safe.
Thank you.
Hey, Colleen, before you go, could you listen in on the Capital Budget Committee's meeting yesterday, their work session, which they...
Oh, no. I'm processing
yes.
hundreds of grants and trying to help businesses every day stay afloat or figure out if they should close their doors and that kind of thing.